Effective. What do you think of when I say that word? If I say, this vacuum is the most effective, what comes to mind? Is it the vacuum that picks up the most dirt in the shortest amount of time? Is it the vacuum that is most versatile and can pick up dust on different surfaces? Is it the quietest one, or the one that operates by itself? The truth is, you could have been thinking of an infinite number of hypothetical vacuums because the very nature of the word effective requires some sort of purpose. Effective to do what? When we're evaluating whether or not a tool like a vacuum or a program is effective, it really is determined by what we consider to be success. And we see this concept a lot in schools, specifically in programs for emergent bilingual students or English language learners, a term you might be more familiar with. Throughout our country, there are so many debates about which program is the most effective for students. And usually, the effectiveness of a program is determined by how quickly the students become proficient in English, or how well their standardized test scores compare with their mainstream peers. However, as we know, children are not computers, and there are many different components that can affect their success in life that goes beyond quantifiable achievement. So while yes, academics and language are important, today I want to look at how these programs are effective at protecting students' social and emotional health. Beyond just their scores, I want to look at how they are affected as humans. So we're going to look at each program a little bit more holistically to get a full picture of the education they provide for our students. So programs for English language learners can be categorized by those that are English focused and have a primary goal of transitioning the student to English as soon as possible, and those that are bilingual focused. So on the monolingual or mainly the English focused side, we have structured English immersion, which is little to no academic support in the student's native language. But more common is English as a second language, in which the student either receives direct instruction about language or receives content instruction through their native language in a supplementary program or an outside of the classroom setting. And then we have sheltered instruction, where content might be taught or enforced using the student's native language. And then on the bilingual side, with a goal of bilingualism and biculturalism, there is transitional bilingual education, which aims to get the student transitioned to English classes as soon as possible, but the first few years are taught in the student's native language. And then one-way and two-way dual language classrooms, in which the students, either all of which are native speakers or half of which are native speakers of Spanish and the other half English, are given instruction during part of the day in one language and the other part of the day in another language. So language is taught through content, not explicitly. And so in order for me to actually evaluate how these programs affect students' social and emotional health, I want to take a look at how they work to promote bilingualism within students and how that bilingualism can actually affect them socially and emotionally, as well as just how the programs are structured in general. So let's start by taking a look at the benefits of being bilingual and what actually happens for students, specifically the cognitive and the social emotional benefits. While there are some people that still argue that people who are bilingual have a slower operating brain or more academic disadvantages, current research proves that this is just not the case. According to Elsa Billings and Ada Walke from the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages in New York, some of the cognitive advantages of being bilingual include academic flexibility, being able to bounce between different tasks, better problem solving for students, less memory loss later in life, better metacognition, just meaning that they can think better about thinking and monitor their own thoughts, and more metalinguistic awareness, just that general knowledge about language. Students who are bilingual have more of that. So these advantages, what do they tell us? They tell us that students who are bilingual have more efficient brains. Their brains can switch rapidly between tasks, and they're very flexible. In terms of the social emotional advantages of being bilingual, which is certainly what we are more focused on today in this video, Billings and Walke note that bilingualism can cause improved self-esteem, better relationships with family and just the community, and better social skills and being able to read those nonverbal social cues by other people. So they note that by empowering students' languages, we are empowering their identity and that of their family. So it is very logical to assume that if we teach a student that their language is important, we are also teaching them that who they are as people are important and who their family is important, since language is so connected with identity. The connection between language and identity is really emphasized by Anna Valence, and there's a quote she said that I really like that emphasizes this point. She said, "By depriving students of the opportunity to preserve and maintain their heritage language, educators are, in essence, depriving them of part of their identity." So there really is just this direct relation between language and who students are. So it's very important to empower all parts of our students in the classroom. And Anna Valence continues on just to mention the effects that language loss and language attrition, which we're going to talk about later, can actually have on students' cultural traditions with their families. I think everybody can remember some sort of cultural tradition that they had in their family, whether it was cooking with a grandparent or reading old stories together, reading books, a special tradition with families. So if you take away or disempower a way a student communicates with their family, they may not be able to have that opportunity to find a sense of belonging with their family and to establish those traditions if they're not able to effectively communicate with all of their relatives. So language, it can't even be merely thought of as a way to communicate. It's a way to connect with other people and develop those meaningful relationships that give students their sense of worth. So if we deny students access to their first language or to the chance to develop that first language, it could have negative effects on who they are as people and on their relationships with their families. Which is why, in terms of social emotional health, I am looking at how these programs really work to maintain that bilingualism so that students' sense of self-worth is not only preserved, but is strengthened throughout the educational process. With these concepts in mind, I'm now going to dive right into the specific programs for English language learners, and we'll take a look step by step at how they might affect students socially and emotionally. So to start off, we're going to start with structured English immersion, which is a more extreme program on the spectrum in which students are put into mainstream classes and they are forced to learn in their second language. They're not really given much support in their native language. It's more of a sink or swim approach, and it is not very common today. In most states, it is outlawed, and students are required to have some sort of primary language support. But with that being said, this underlying ideology of English first and English learning being more important than the preservation of the second language is still found today in many classrooms, even if they're not called structured English immersion programs. So we're going to take a look at a study published in 2014 by Elena Parra, in which she actually analyzed the social emotional effects of English-only instruction at an elementary school in Arizona. She studied 18 parents and 10 children in a longitudinal study, and so we're going to take a look at what those results are. This is a chart showing Elena Parra's study, and the results, though it is a small number of students and parents, is quite striking. It was reported by 72% of parents and 100% of children anxiety symptoms among their children participating in the program. 50% of parents and 60% of children reported depression symptoms. 50% of children and 44% of parents noted a negative trend in self-esteem. And 28% of parents and 30% of children noted anger found as a result of these programs. Parents were quoted saying, "I felt very nervous because all of them spoke English and I did not understand, and I did not know how to answer, did not know what they were telling me." Another student thought to herself, "You are not going to learn, you will continue to be dumb." One parent reported, when asked about the social effect of these programs on her students, she said maybe she thought that no child talked the way she did. All she did was cry and cry. She did not want to have friends. She did not want anything. And 83% of parents said that the program took some sort of toll on their family life. Like one parent who was very frustrated that she couldn't help her child with their homework. And she said, "I feel very bad because I cannot help him to do his homework. I feel like I'm not good for nothing at this moment." So while, like I mentioned, this is a smaller sample size, it's limited to one school, so you cannot generalize all of this data to all structured English immersion programs that exist in general, but it still has very clear results that instruction explicitly in English without native support in the first language can be extremely detrimental to students' mental health. It's obviously pretty intuitive that if students are made to learn in a language they do not understand and in an environment with other students who speak that language they don't know, they probably will feel inferior and may even reject their native language as a result, thinking that it is a problem instead of a language of value. So even in programs that might have some more first language support, it's still important to look at this extreme end of the spectrum to recognize those psychological effects of just being in an environment that does not empower a student's identity and does not empower what they come into the classroom with. So now you might be thinking, okay, fine. Putting a student who does not know the language into a classroom where they're forced to speak that language is obviously poor planning, but in my district, we have specific rooms where the student can go so that they can speak their language with other students who also speak that language. So let's talk about this program model next, which could be called mainstreaming with pullout or English as a second language ESL programs. Now, these programs vary a lot throughout the nation. They can be completely based on academic content from the classroom, the mainstream classroom, but with just some extra support in the student's first language. They could also teach isolated English language skills, essentially a language class with explicit instruction in English to these students. Or they can just teach whole subjects outside of the classroom in the student's native language. For example, they could just teach all reading lessons in this smaller room, this outside of the classroom setting. And to analyze these ESL models, they are certainly better than no program at all for students' social and emotional health because they at least offer some sort of support for the student's native language. So their confidence and self-esteem might not suffer as much as they would with a structured English immersion program where there is none of that support. Students are still empowered to use their language, which is a good thing. However, this program model, as you might already be guessing, is certainly not without its downsides when it comes to students' social and emotional health. According to Baker and Wright, students in ESL programs could end up behind on their peers in subjects. They could feel left out by their classmates, or they could be seen as less intelligent. So because these students spend a good portion of the day outside of the classroom, they're missing out on key components of the day. They're missing out on key instruction from their main classroom teacher and access to that same knowledge their other peers get. And also, when it comes almost more important to social health for students, they're missing out on valuable time to connect with their other peers. By being isolated from the classroom, they feel less connected with their fellow classmates, and they could even feel less intelligent if they are self-conscious of the fact that they have to get instruction in a different room for the classroom. For example, one student, when he was asked about his experience in an ESL classroom, said, "The other kids wouldn't say anything, but I would feel lost. Here I go again. Why do I have to do this? I feel so dumb. I felt like I'm dumb." And if anyone who is worked with kids, pretty much anybody would feel a chord struck when you hear that, when you hear a child say that they feel dumb by a program in school. As most would agree, school should be a place to empower students and to build on the strengths that they come into the classroom with, rather than put them down for something they don't know, for not checking all the boxes that they are supposed to have. Schools should build on those strengths to develop self-efficacy and to develop self-esteem within students. And at a time, especially in those early years when socialization and peer development is so important for students, it is crucial that they are given equal opportunities to connect with their peers, using language as a tool. So with ESL programs, they are really put at a disadvantage because they're not able to connect with their classmates as much. But of course, as I mentioned, no program is completely bad. These students are still given some support in their native language, and at least they might be able to develop community with other speakers of that language within the school, which could be a positive to develop the value of that language. But moving on, there are other programs that are considered to be bilingual programs, as I mentioned earlier with that flow chart. And in these programs, the student's first language is used to teach the content rather than just being used as a tool to learn English. But these programs all vary and they have different program lengths. So we're now going to take a look at these programs and how they affect students socially, emotionally. starting with transitional bilingual education. I mentioned before, transitional bilingual education models, as they are called transitional, their main goal is transition to the English mainstream classroom as soon as possible. So early exit transitional models might only last about 1 or 2 years. They typically have a shorter duration because they are trying to get students as quickly as possible reclassified into mainstream classrooms. And in this sense, the goal is not long-term maintenance of their bilingualism and development of their native language. It is mainly, I should say, English acquisition. So when I mentioned earlier all of those social emotional benefits of bilingualism, these students may not be receiving that because the goal is not that long-term bilingualism. But in this sense, Baker and Wright, they actually have called this program assimilationist because only a short number of years are dedicated to instruction in the native language, so it is not the primary goal, bilingualism. And this underlying message to students that the priority is English proficiency could have different social emotional effects on them. For example, without direct support long-term for bilingualism, language attrition is possible. So what is language attrition? Well, according to Raquel Anderson in her article, First Language Loss in Spanish-Speaking Children, language attrition is what happens when the student does not necessarily lose their first language entirely, but it does not develop further. Their skills in the language hits a plateau, essentially. So they're not going to advance their skills further. And this is more likely in situations where the students have more support in their second language than their first language. So if we look at a transitional model where students are gradually using English more and more and their native language less and less, it is the perfect situation to have a language be stalled in this sense. So because of this, students might, for example, if they stop receiving native language instruction around 4th grade, their academic knowledge in their native language might not progress much further throughout their life. So bilingualism is not supported in the long term because students' growth in their native language sort of stops as soon as their instruction in that language stops. So although we cannot find explicit research right now about the social emotional effects on transitional bilingual education programs, it can reasonably be concluded that by phasing out their first language, it's not shown to be valued in the classroom, which definitely limits the students' chances to become bilingual and get those benefits that multilingualism can have, both emotionally and psychologically. But of course, it is worth noting that this transitional model can be effective for some students, and it does have some social emotional benefits to the students that are involved in it that maybe some students in other programs do not have access to. For example, at least in this program, students are given access to content taught in their first language for a few years, rather than just in a classroom outside of their main classroom or for a few months. So in this way, it's better linguistically than programs like structured English immersion, because in this sense, the student actually has access to a teacher that speaks their first language. And also, according to Hal et al., it was found that a pre-kindergarten teacher teaching in the student's first language can help with the development of their frustration tolerance, assertiveness, task orientation, and peer social skills among Spanish-speaking children. So as we learned, or as I mentioned earlier, that one of the benefits of bilingualism is those improved social skills. Students are still get access to those benefits in a transitional model when their bilingualism is still supported in the classroom. It can positively affect those communication skills. And similarly with the socialization, in this program, students are around other English language learners, so that could take away some of the stigma. I read earlier some of the quotes by students who felt very out of place, and they had very poor self-esteem because they were perhaps one of the only English language learners in the classroom and felt that their peers looked upon them negatively. So in this model, students, that negative stigma is taken away as the language is used and given value in the classroom as a means of instruction rather than something that has to be done in a room outside the classroom. So when bilingualism is supported, in a transitional model, it can be effective for students socially, emotionally as well. Type of English language program that I will mention is dual language programs. And these can either be one-way or two-way. So by nature, dual language programs just mean that language is taught through the content throughout the whole day. And these programs typically last longer than transitional bilingual models. So while a transitional model might last 1 to 3 years, a dual language program typically lasts 4 to around 6 years, some even going into high school, but usually going from around 1st to 5th grade are these programs. So in one-way dual language programs, all of the students in the class have the same first language, and they have content taught in the day in their native language, and they all share that second language growth they're going through at the same time. But in two-way programs, about half of the students generally are speaking English as their native language, and around half are speaking Spanish as their native language. So they have opposite courses of language development in those situations. It's just a model that shows a possible progression of language use throughout the years. So you can see that typically in earlier dual language programs, like in kindergarten or 1st grade, Spanish is used as the primary means of instruction for almost 90% of the day, give or take, with a little time to English, and then gradually those shift out to become almost equal, more or less, around 5th grade. And throughout, if the program is offered in junior high as well, throughout junior high, they maintain that almost equality in the two languages. Importantly for students' emotional health, the main goal of this program is bilingualism. So according to Jonathan David Padron, two-way immersion programs provide the students a safe space to communicate in their native tongue, which increases their comfort level in the classroom and allows them the opportunity to succeed. That was his quote from his article. So essentially, students in these programs are given a place where their language is valued and where they have an equal chance to have success in the classroom because the content is given in a way that makes sense to them. So they have the same access to academic content as their mainstream peers, except in this model, all of their languages are supported, so students are able to see those social and emotional benefits of multilingualism that we mentioned earlier. And going off of that, this program maintains biculturalism within the students, which is another pillar of students' education that needs to be valued as well in order for students to have positive social emotional benefits. In this manner, students could have limited experiences with what's called acculturative stress, defined by Lauren J. Albig as the psychosocial stressors associated with being part of two conflicting cultures and the perceived need to conform to the host or majority culture to avoid discrimination. You can see the main elements of acculturative stress that Albig outlines: the familial acculturative gap, lack of belonging in school and community, perceived discrimination, and immigration-related stress all contribute to a student's acculturative stress, which is certainly a negative manifestation of their social emotional health. And what we want for students is acculturation, when they are able to find a balance, not necessarily equal at all, but some sort of balance between their home culture and, if they're an immigrant, the culture that they are living in the United States, so that they can feel like they belong in school, but also maintain their unique identity with their families. It acknowledges that this stress is made so much worse in schools if the student feels discriminated against, or if they have to worry about their English proficiency compared to their peers, if they're immigrants, if they miss their home country, or if they are in a separate class from their mainstream peers. So when students are isolated from the community and they feel like they don't belong, that's when that acculturative stress is going to be worse, and they have a harder time adjusting and finding that belonging in their school community, which is so important for a student's psychological health. Studies have actually found, according to Albig, that Latino students who are designated as English language learners are much more likely to experience acculturative stress than non-English language learning Latino students. So what that means is that English proficiency has a significant impact on how the student feels in terms of their adjustment to the school and the educational context. So a program that helps them to develop their languages, but also preserves their sense of identity, is extremely crucial to making the student feel welcome in the environment. A class that's going to celebrate the students' multiple identities and help them develop relationships with peers could alleviate some of this stress that students might come to the classroom with if they're learning English as a second language. So It's important to, of course, promote English language development so the student can have success beyond the classroom, but also make the student's home language and culture be valued so the student does not have to sacrifice any part of their cultural identity that they share with their family or home communities. And kind of just continuing off of that, when it comes to biculturalism, dual language programs, the two-way dual language programs, have a unique aspect as well because half of the students, as I mentioned, are native English speakers and the other half are native Spanish speakers. So it offers a very unique opportunity for a celebration of differences, which could lead to positive social emotional health because students are able to relate to other students of different backgrounds and just learn communicative competence and also cultural competence, which are very important in the real world and to, again, not to be repetitive, but to that student's sense of belonging. Some students who are traditionally English language learners, if they're placed in, for example, the structured English immersion program, they might have a negative experience because they could be ridiculed by monolingual English-speaking peers, unfortunately. Maybe they are made to feel inferior because they don't speak the language, which is not valuable or helpful to the students' mental health at all. So it's important that the students are in a classroom where their languages and their culture is definitely valued. But of course, no program is completely perfect or without its flaws, and dual language programs are not isolated from that. According to educationnext.org, some two-way programs could actually be better serving the majority language speakers that are present in the classroom. And that's important to keep an eye out for as we're looking to how these programs develop a student's social emotional health. It has been brought up as a concern by some educators that two-way dual language programs might be benefiting the native English speakers more and putting the native Spanish speakers as more of a linguistic resource in the classroom rather than valuable students that also need to learn English. So it should be avoided that Spanish development is promoted over English development in these dual language programs because we have to value all of our students and value all of their educational experiences that they will be having throughout the classroom. And another downside to these programs is that it actually could take slightly longer for English proficiency to develop because, as they note, Umansky et al., as they note, students are learning many things at once, quote, academic content, English, and in two language programs, literacy in their home language, end quote. So since these programs have a split amount of time taught in the two languages and they're learning all of the content, the English instruction is less intensive at one time. It's spread out over many years. So they have found that the time it takes to become proficient in English, according to the replacement tests, could actually be longer. But at the same time, Umansky and Reardon found that these students in the two language programs generally catch up with their peers later on and actually go above and beyond their peers in the long term. So while their English language development might be stalled a bit at first, in the long run, they have even better language outcomes. And this is language outcomes and language proficiency in both languages is important to students' social emotional health. According to Hal et al., students who have the most limited English proficiency were found to have the worst social emotional health. That is to say, students who are not able to communicate well in English might not feel very well psychologically. So it is important that their English language is developed thoroughly, but also, as we mentioned, their bilingualism supported in addition in an additive bilingual environment. Revisit these main pillars again. These programs that are dual language and support students' bilingualism could help with the improved self-esteem, family community relationships, and heightened social skills. Along with the biculturalism mentioned, these programs could have very positive social emotional benefits on students despite the drawbacks that still need to be corrected as all programs are continued to be improved throughout the next coming years. With this brief synthesis of research and evaluation of each specific bilingual program, it is apparent that emergent bilingual student social emotional health is a function of the promotion of bilingualism and biculturalism in the classroom. With the maintenance of home language and culture and the development of the majority language and culture through the students, they can see positive social emotional benefits. So those programs like dual language and late exit transitional programs that support students' bilingualism and biculturalism could be good choices to teach the student holistically and improve and maintain their mental health. With that being said, of course, these programs might have an initial delay in English language development, and so really no program is without its drawbacks. There is no perfection right now in the education world, but those programs that support the child linguistically, academically, and socially emotionally are the way to go to give the child most success in the future. But in general, as best educational practices and methods are constantly debated, which they always are, it is very important to look beyond those standardized test scores, beyond the replacement rates for English language programs, and look at the students as human beings, because that's what they are. And their social emotional development is just as important a factor to be considered for the individual student and society as a whole, beyond the number that is associated with their intelligence and their language proficiency. So, the next time you're told the most effective bilingual program is this, or this is the most effective teaching strategy, I want you to really think about that word effective and wonder, what kind of vacuum are they trying to sell me? Thank you.